All right. Well, officially welcome everyone to tonight's program, which is our Gap Year 101. So, as I mentioned, this is going to be a recorded session that you will receive a link to tomorrow in case you want to refer back to any of the information that has been shared with you this evening. However, if you are joining us now, we are very excited to have you here live, and you will have the opportunity to ask some questions to our wonderful Gap Year consultant at the end here, Julia, later on in this presentation. So, um, yeah. Otherwise, just a little bit of housekeeping too. This is a webinar, so you all are on mute. It's really just to keep background noise to a minimum while we are presenting. But if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to pop them into the chat box, and we will either address them during the presentation or we'll post them to Julia at the end if it seems to be a question that's really relevant to everybody. So just bear with us. There will be a lot of really great information that is shared with you all this evening. But just as a little bit of an introduction to myself, my name is Margot Moore, and I am the co-director of the USA Gap Year Fairs. And really excited to have you all spending the evening with us today. In terms of my background, I am truly an educator at heart, and I have been working in the gap year field for just about a decade now. So I started out as a trip leader, running summer and gap year programs for one of the programs that is featured on the USA Gap Year Fairs, before spending about 7 years in their office directing programs from the administrative side. So I have been with students in the field. I've worked with families and parents and students in their gap year journey, in terms of finding the right program for them. I've been traveling to the USA Gap Year Fairs for many years, so this is really where my heart has been for quite a while right now. I was very fortunate as a high schooler myself to be able to study abroad twice during my high school career, and that really launched me on this trajectory into experiential education. I also got to study abroad during college, which was a really impactful experience. So that has really shaped kind of my personal journey. And having been a high schooler, potentially, if we have some juniors, seniors on the call tonight, having been in your shoes, it's a really exciting time to be adventuring out into these new experiences that are on the horizon for you. So. With those experiences too, I just am a firm believer in experiential education, such as those provided on a gap year opportunity. I have traveled with students all over the world. I've been able to develop and design programs for students all over the world. I also just finished my master's in education. And as an avid traveler myself, really excited to share with you more about these opportunities this evening. On our next slide. So just so you all, before we get started, just want to make sure you all are aware that this information session is hosted by USA Gap Year Fairs, which is powered by GoOverseas.com. And Go Overseas is a community-centered resource for all different types of travel experiences. So what you can really think of it as is like a Yelp, but for experiential programs abroad. So this is a space where former students and alumni of the programs are able to go on and leave a review about the experience that they had with the program, which is a really great resource for you all as you're kind of navigating what might be the right fit. So there are a bunch of different types of programs also on Go Overseas beyond just Gap Year. So yes, you can read alumni reviews, find programs. I'll actually have you hop to the next slide, Julia, please. Find programs, browse articles and guides about different experiences, whether it's just general travel or gap year or study abroad. You can also learn about scholarship opportunities, including our $5,000 gap year scholarship that will close in March. So just a couple of other resources that are available to you through the USA Gap Year Fairs. We do have our Gap Year Guide, which we actually just finalized, which is super exciting. And that is going to be a resource available at the fairs, but we do also have a digital guide that you will have access to, should you have any interest in that. And then on the next slide, we have another great resource called our Gap Matcher, which is basically like an online quiz that you can take that helps to match you with a program that might be the right fit for you. So you answer some general questions, put in some of your interests and things you're excited about, and it's just a great resource to kind of start pointing you in the right direction if you're just at the initial onset of this and trying to get a sense for what the right fit might be. So otherwise, the other resource that I wanted to highlight is our scholarship. So as I mentioned, we do have a $5,000 scholarship that is a really great opportunity to get some extra funding towards a gap year. We know that it can be, some programs, depending on what you're looking for, can be expensive. And I know Julia will touch on less expensive options as well, but the scholarship can be a really great access point for students. So that will be opening in January and closing in March. So the application isn't quite open yet. We will send an email with a bit more information about it soon. And you do get an extra point towards the scholarship if you attend one of our in-person events. So on the next slide, you'll see our scholarship winner from last year, Ash. This was really exciting. It's super fun to get to go give this big $5,000 check to somebody who has applied for the scholarship and is really excited about this opportunity. And Ash actually just sent us a really great update about how their gap year is going, and they're on a program this fall in Australia and New Zealand, and it has proved to be really impactful for them. So really exciting to kind of see this on the tail end of it as they're currently on their gap year, but a great resource for you all if you're interested in applying. Otherwise, we have a list of all of our virtual and in-person events. So this is a great place to be right now. You're going to get the 101 of gap years. But if you are also interested in joining at one of our in-person events, we have events all over the country happening in January and February. So would encourage you to take a look at the schedule and see if there might be something nearby that could be of interest where you can actually go and speak with program representatives to learn a bit more about those opportunities. Otherwise, as I mentioned, I'm going to be on the chat throughout this presentation. So feel free to pop in any questions that do arise. But again, would encourage you to hold them till the end because Julia is going to give you a lot of great information. And then, so basically as a little schedule overview, Julia is going to give you some information for about 20 to 25 minutes. And then we will have about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for a live Q&A. So excited to interact with you all further at the end. But otherwise excited to present Julia to you. Julia is the founder of EnRoute Consulting. And if I'm not mistaken, I think, Julia, are you at about 15 years of experience in the gap year field now? Have we hit 15? 16. Okay, I thought we
it's
were over
crazy.
15. Okay, so over 15 years of experience working with students and helping them plan meaningful gap year experiences. So she is a wealth of information and knowledge. Really excited to have her telling you more about this evening. She's also a member of the GYA Gap Year Association Board of Directors. You're still on the board, correct, Julia?
Yep, until the end of the year. And then I'm rolling off. My terms are finished, but it's been a wild ride.
Yes, on the board and also head of the Gap Year Association Outreach Committee. So just a bit of background about Julia, but I'll let her take it away and tell you a little bit more about herself.
Thank you so much, Margot, and welcome to everybody who's here tonight. This is my favorite topic to talk about. So I will treat you all to some information that I hope is both inspiring but also actionable. I want everybody to leave here tonight feeling like they have some tools to start building their own gap experience. So as Margot mentioned, like her, I've been steeped in this gap year space for a long time. That top image is me on my own gap year in Tanzania. And I took my gap year after college, and that's a great time to take a gap year as well. But after I had that experience of spending 9 months in Tanzania doing public health outreach, I realized that if I had done that before college, it actually would have reinformed my entire higher education experience. And so I became very excited and passionate about this concept of taking a gap year intentionally as a bridge between high school and those next educational steps. So that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about tonight. And since that first gap year, I've taken mini gap years with my family. I took a trip around the world with my husband before we got married. So I definitely have the adventure bug deep within me now. And sometimes I'm even lucky enough to get to see my students in person on program, which is that middle picture in South Africa. So I wanted to kind of start us off tonight by just kind of painting a picture. And I want everybody to kind of think about how young people, whether you're a young adult on the call tonight or whether you're the parent of a young adult, how students are feeling at the end of their high school career typically. You know, I think that we're in a really tender moment because there's a lot of students who are feeling a lot of pressure. You know, they're feeling pressure to know what they want to be when they grow up. They're feeling pressure to go out into the world and act, you know, and have all the skills to live independently and do things like budget and do their laundry and navigate social situations with new people like roommates or classmates. There's a lot of financial pressure to make a good decision about higher education or, you know, career path and things like that. So while there is this amazing rite of passage of, you know, graduating high school, sometimes it feels like these days it's coming at a cost of feeling a lot of anxiety about the future. And that's, you know, both external kind of societal causes as well as what might be going on with an individual. And so, unfortunately, we're also seeing a moment where the higher education system is not being super helpful in helping young adults enter that adulthood with the skills and the tools they need to be successful in the workforce. There's a lot of data out there about how long it takes a student to graduate with an undergrad degree. It takes the national average is 6 years to get your bachelor's degree instead of 4 years. We have a college debt crisis. And I'm not saying all of this because I want to be negative. I'm saying it because I think it's a kind of uncomfortable truth that a lot of times we don't fully acknowledge because we don't know what to do about it. This is the air that we're breathing and the water that we're swimming in. But I think that the cool secret that you all are about to uncover tonight is that, in my mind, a gap year is actually the cleanest life hack that any young adult can implement that can fuel their future in ways that are almost unimaginable for a 17-year-old or 16-year-old that's first introduced the option. And what we find is that when a gap year is done right, these are the outcomes that we see. So this young adult that was maybe feeling unsure about what their path was after high school, or if they were going to thrive in college, or if they knew what they wanted to quote unquote be when they grew up, is actually going to have these outcomes, which is what we see from gap year students when we do data collection, when we do surveys. We find that students are just so much more ready. And it's not that they have all the answers. It's just that because they've gone out into the world, they've gone out of the classroom, they've gone and done things that they're interested in, that fuel their curiosity, that they feel so much more settled in themselves and comfortable with the world, that they are much more set up to succeed in whatever higher education pathway they choose or career path that they choose. So I think that these are some pretty amazing things to be, to be able to say about yourself at the end of a well executed gap experience. And these are all outcomes that I see in the students that I work with. So these are just to highlight a couple other benefits. When we did a national alumni survey about 4 years ago, what we found was that 95% of the survey respondents said that their gap year helped set them up well for their next step. We also found that almost everybody said that they matured and they became more confident, and that they developed the ability to interact with people of diverse backgrounds and cultures. And then additionally, 82% said they felt like they had a competitive job advantage as a result of their gap time. And this can be because of skills that they got because of a resume building experience, like an internship or a work experience, but it's also all of those soft skills that you saw on the previous slide that help in the workplace. I was actually just talking with a student yesterday who was effusive in saying how much her gap year helped launch her into further, like kind of building out her more internship experiences and more work experience, because she did something interesting on her gap year and it jumped off the resume page. It jumped off the cover letter and allowed her to differentiate herself from people in, she's an engineer. And so it allowed her to kind of differentiate herself from the sea of other engineers who've done all the same things, have gotten all the same accolades, but she was able to speak to some of these more unique experiences that she had on her gap year. So the benefits are there. And really the crux of this that I want you all to understand is that to get these benefits, it does not matter how much money you spend on a program or an experience or on your gap year as a whole. It doesn't matter what you do, if you go, stay locally on your gap year or if you go halfway around the world. And it doesn't matter how long you have to do a certain experience. The biggest thing that matters, the most important ingredient, is that it is an intentional experience and that it is driven by the individual. So you, as the young adult who's taking your gap year, is the one making it happen for yourself. And that is the secret sauce. And that's what makes this time so powerful. So I know I just jumped right in with benefits to make this argument, but I really also want to anchor us to a shared language here. So let's talk a little bit about what the actual definition of a gap year is, because a lot of times people will come into this concept with their own, everybody entered here today because they heard the term gap year and got curious. The term that we use as an industry, or the definition we use as an industry, is that it is an intentional period of personal growth and exploration supported through experiential learning opportunities. And beyond that, it's a time to focus on these three quadrants of like personal, practical, and professional development. So the personal is the things you do for you because you're interested in something, you want to deepen a hobby, you want to try something new. Practical things are going to be the things that you do to build that life skill set. So things like getting your driver's license, learning how to budget, traveling on your own, meeting new people, navigating social situations, problem solving. And then the professional development is going to be any of those career exploration activities or opportunities that help you get closer to figuring out what the appropriate college path is, or higher education path, or certification path. All of those things can be unlocked with you kind of intentionally focus on how this period of time can go. Now, when I'm working with students, what I'm doing is getting to know that individual through and helping them through this goal setting process using that framework, and then matching them with different opportunities that support their individual needs. Because I think the really cool thing about a gap year is that it is so customizable. I sometimes say that the analogy I use is that it's like dumping out a bucket of Legos. And so there's these different components. There's programs or there's self-designed experiences that we'll talk about later, but the student themselves gets to build it, and it can look however you want. And you look next to someone else who's building their Lego masterpiece, and it's going to look different. And that's the really cool thing about a gap year, is that there's nothing cookie cutter about it. So when it comes to how to put something like this together, it's a much different process than the college application process. So if I have any seniors who are recovering from what has been no doubt a harrowing fall of applying to colleges, you'll rest assured that this is a different process. And for juniors or underclassmen on the call, you've got a little bit of time before you have to go through that process. But unlike the college admissions process, where you're kind of formulating an argument for an institution to accept you, the gap year planning process is actually all about choice. There's very, very few programs that are competitive or that ice anybody out for any reason other than the fact that you have to just be qualified to do it. You have to be enthusiastic and able to participate in the activities. And that's usually just the prerequisite to most gap year opportunities. So it's really refreshing. It's mostly what you want to do and where you want to go within what we would call this kind of 4 quadrants of parameters: geography, progression, and anchors. So the parameters are kind of our first stop. This is where you sit down as a family around the kitchen table, and everybody gets to say their piece about how this gap year could look. And parents, this is the time for you to kind of lay down your hard stops. So if there's geography that you feel comfortable with or uncomfortable with, or if there's a budget that you're willing to support a young adult in, or if there's other things that are crucial to encouraging or supporting a certain experience, you want to lay down those parameters at the very beginning of this process so that your kid can go off and do research and plan their year within kind of the boundaries that you all have agreed upon. And similarly, if you're a young adult and advocating for something to your parents, this conversation is a good time to kind of start coming together and having a shared understanding around the kind of overarching goals and parameters of this year. And then we, think about geography. And what we're lucky enough right now that even in the world as crazy as it seems, it is so much more open than it was a few years ago when we had COVID travel restrictions. So, as far as the world, it is very open again, and you can travel almost anywhere that you feel comfortable going, and that matches your own kind of, ways that you want to grow and develop on your own gap year. So a geography, thinking about that geography and dreaming big at first is important. So if there's something that you think is unlikely, like, oh, I really want to go to New Zealand, or I want to go to Fiji, or I want to stay with friends in Hawaii, even if it doesn't seem super likely, in this brainstorming process, throw it down on a piece of paper, kind of set it aside, and see if you can then match it up with something that feels more feasible as you start getting into the planning. The next thing is that we want to talk about a progression. This is probably the special ingredient that I can say really helps frame out a gap year in the most logical way. So what progression means is that if you think about how you're going to align the different pieces of the itinerary, you don't want to start with the most independent, scary, challenging thing first. You want to think of your gap year as kind of a video game where you're kind of conquering a level and then taking on a new level and then a new level after that. So you want to start your gap year with probably the most structured experience that you're going to do on your gap year. So maybe that's a experiential program or a volunteer experience or staying close to home and working, something that feels like a comfort zone stretch, but not too far out. Whereas if you're wanting to backpack Europe on your own without a program or something like that, that might happen later in your year. So basically you want to think about the year as a scaffolding experience of progressive challenge or progressive independence. And that can look a little different for each student because every student's going to have a different starting point. But just know that progression is what really builds out independence and confidence as the year goes on. And then last, we have the anchors. The anchors are what I just mentioned as the personal, practical, and professional goals. That's I think another piece of this brainstorming process that can be so helpful, because if you do start blindly Googling gap year programs, I can tell you're going to get overwhelmed in about 20 seconds because there's so much out there and it all looks good. And like a lot of our partner programs on the USA Gap Year Fair circuit are all amazing programs, but that doesn't mean that they're right fit for you. So what you want to do is you really want to start with what you want to do this year. So those practical things, like skills you want to gain, the personal things that you want to do for fun. So maybe you want to see a penguin, or maybe you want to learn to surf, or maybe you want to use that Spanish that you've been taking in high school. And then the career stuff is going to be those things that you think you might want to do or you might want to explore. So maybe you're interested in marketing or journalism or medicine or anything. It doesn't have to be that you have a lot of evidence for that interest, because a gap year is all about exploring and trying things out. Because, for example, I did have a student a few years ago who was pretty convinced that they wanted to be a doctor. And so they went to South Africa in Cape Town, and they did an internship program where they were able to go and shadow doctors in a private hospital in Cape Town. So it was really amazing access that she got to follow doctors on rounds. She got to just observe all of these inner workings of the hospital system there. And she also got to spend time in a lab helping out with research. And what she discovered through that 4-month-long experience is that, she didn't really love the practical direct application of medicine, but she loved the research. She loved being in a lab. And she is currently a PhD graduate now doing research. So that experience before she even stepped foot into a college classroom allowed her to fine-tune her college experience in a much more intentional way, which I think was pretty fabulous. So where in the world, speaking of geography, like where can a good gap year take you? And the answer is it can take you literally anywhere, and most students will spend their gap time in multiple places. So you don't have to go far, as I've mentioned a couple of times now. You can stay local for part or all of your gap year. The most important thing is that you get out of your bubble. If you are staying local for part or all of your gap year, you should be seeking out new people, exploring new places in your community, making sure that you are pushing those boundaries of what you know and what you're comfortable and familiar with, because that is where the growth happens. That is where the good stuff happens. But beyond that, there's also amazing gap year opportunities in our own country. And our country is so vast and has so much to offer that there's really endless numbers of things that you could do in different corners of where we are. But then also internationally, like I said, there's many different programs and unstructured experiences and travel opportunities that you can have just about anywhere. So the reason I like to mention all of this is that I think that I just want to normalize the fact that a lot of students do kind of combine things. So they may, spend half their gap year at home earning money so they can go and travel for half their year, or they might do the third thing where you split your year into thirds and you work for a third, you do a program for a third, and then you do an independent experience for a third, or something along those lines. So there's many ways to divvy up your year, but it's easiest to think of it in seasons and kind of chunk it out that way so that you can imagine how different pieces of the gap year could go and how that progression might be able to be built in. So now we have the most word-heavy slide, and I haven't quite figured out how to make this slide less wordy, so you're just going to have to bear with me while I talk through it. But I think that it is really illustrative because, the biggest stumbling block, I think, in general gap year knowledge and education is what is out there and is it appropriate for me, or how do I find it online, and those kinds of things. And I think that part of that is understanding what is a program and what is not a program. So all the things on the top row are gap year, or not even gap year, but they're just programmatic opportunities. That means that they are structured opportunities that you sign up for, and in return for signing up and usually paying a fee, but not always, you are getting the service and you're getting the structure and logistical support of an entity and being able to go do something cool. So the most common type of gap year program, if we're talking about something that's specific to the gap year space, is these experiential semesters. These are going to be guided programs with a cohort of your peers where you're off doing something really hands-on, and usually it's themed around something. So it might be themed around outdoor education, or you might be doing a language immersion, or you might be doing what I call the buffet experience, where you are traveling in a certain region and getting to do different sections of experiences. So you might be doing some environmental conservation, and then some education work, and then some adventure travel, all with the same people in a really cool, unique cultural setting. So these experiences typically run between 6 and 14 weeks. So they tend to be kind of that semester length, but a little bit of variability within there. And some of those will actually offer college credits. So if you're interested in using 529 money to pay for them, that's usually the easiest sector of these programs that you can leverage that money for. And I will talk about 529 money a little bit later, but just so you know, those are the most structured experiences because you are with leaders the whole time. We also have volunteering, both domestically and internationally. And when we talk about a volunteering program, this is going to be something where they offer housing, there's a project manager who's kind of in charge of the volunteers and helping them understand their work and supporting them. And usually you're with other people. So this would be different than kind of working at a local soup kitchen or something like that in your own community. This is something where you go away and you work at a wildlife sanctuary in Costa Rica, or you go and do an English teaching program in Bali or something like that. And a lot of these opportunities, again, you could be with volunteers from all over the world who are all living together, eating together, serving a community together. And these can be amazing experiences for both cultural immersion and skill building and just doing something really cool. So, and they often are more flexible in length. So sometimes they're set start dates, and sometimes you can kind of join, at a certain intake and stay and choose your length of time, anywhere from a few weeks up to many months. Next, we have enrichment courses, and these are going to be the types of experiences that you use to learn a new skill. So maybe you want to, again, practice a language, or maybe you want to study sculpture in Florence, Italy, or maybe you want to get your scuba diving certification, or maybe you want to learn how to build a traditional boat in Maine. These are all things you can do. These are all things that exist. And they aren't typically strictly gap year programs, so you may be with people of a wider age range, but you can find supportive activities just about anywhere in the world for just about any hobby that you can think of. I have a student this year who was into jujitsu and went and did a jujitsu course. I have a student who got their yoga teaching certification in Costa Rica. I have a student who did that boat building course in Maine, or a music recording course in Ohio. So there's a lot out there, and some of it you can leverage into a resume or as a precursor to maybe studying something in college, or maybe it's just for your own enrichment. Next, we have National Service, otherwise known as AmeriCorps. And this is unique because it is both a program, but it is a cost neutral option, meaning that you get a stipend during your service, and then you also get an education award at the end of your service that you can use towards college. So if you've ever heard of like City Year or NCCC, these are all kind of governmental supported programs that you can do as an 18-year-old who's graduated high school. And they are well supported. They look amazing on a resume, and they're all domestic, so they're not international, but you can go to all sorts of amazing places in our country and do really, really meaningful work. Last, we have interning, which is, again, you might think intern, okay, my mom's buddy is an attorney and I can get coffee for him and his law firm and kind of watch the lawyers do their thing. When we talk about an internship program, we're actually talking about a program that helps match you with an internship in a sector that you're interested in. And usually it's in a community or in a city where you can live with other interns who are all on their own individualized internship program. There are a couple of these in the States, but there is an even wider variety of locations internationally, such as Cape Town, South Africa, like I mentioned before, Dublin, Ireland, Sydney, Australia, New Zealand, Israel. There's many places where you can do these types of internship programs. And typically people will do this for 2 to 4 months. And I will say that the international internships tend to be extremely high quality, especially when you're talking about for 18 or 19-year-olds who have limited work experience. I've had many students have very successful and meaningful career exploration experiences while being able to live independently with other people, make friends, and be in a cool international location. So kind of checks a lot of boxes for students these days who are really interested in career exploration. So all that is to say that most of those programs, except for the AmeriCorps, are a bit of an investment. They range in cost. I can talk about that later if people are interested, but usually people are also tying in these program ideas with these self-designed things in the bottom category. So these are all going to be opportunities that, unlike the top category, you have to make happen yourself. So you are the one who is creating these experiences with the help sometimes of some websites and some other buffering things. So for example, travel. This is something that a lot of the parents on the call might think of when they think of the quintessential gap year experience. You put on a backpack, you hit like the Eurail or you hit Southeast Asia and travel around. And that is still like a rite of passage of many, many gap year students. And I would say of the students I work with in this past cycle, probably 70%, 75% traveled independently on their own or with friends they met on their gap year during their gap year experience. And this is something that typically people did towards the end of their gap year, but not exclusively. I did have a student last year who traveled on his own to 15 different countries over the course of his year. And my job was to kind of help him manage all of those choices of where to go and how to make it happen. And it was a really fun partnership. But most students don't bite off that much. They might do like 2 weeks of traveling after they volunteered, or they might plan to travel around a little bit before meeting up with family for a family vacation or something along those lines. Then we have local opportunities. Like I mentioned, a lot of students will spend time close to home, and you can seek out all sorts of meaningful activities, whether it's interning or volunteering or, working and earning some money. But there's also the next category is destination work. So you can actually live away and earn money, which is very attractive to a lot of 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds who want to flex those independent muscles. So you can do resort work. So going and living at a resort, like for example, Aspen or Sedona, Arizona, some of these big tourist towns that have resorts that offer employee housing. That's the key, is that they have employee housing. So you can live with other people who are working at the resort, get a resort job, make some money. This is also really popular in national parks. A lot of students work in national parks on their gap year. And you can also get a destination working holiday visa and work in Australia or New Zealand or Canada. And that's a little bit more independent, obviously, but it's still very possible for students who are really looking for an adventure. Then we have projects. Now, projects tend to be something personal to a student. So I had a student a couple of years ago who wanted to write a graphic novel. And every week they published a chapter onto a website that offered peer review. And towards the end of their gap year, they had published the whole thing. And it was a really meaningful project they accomplished. But maybe it's writing a play, or maybe it's practicing your art, or starting an Etsy shop and selling something. So it can be anything that's meaningful to you that you want to do and carve out time for on your gap year. Could also include spending time with friends or family. I had a student this year who literally carved out a month just to spend with his grandpa, because he wanted to spend time with his grandpa. And I thought that was like the best. So this is your time to choose what you want to do. And then lastly, this is again a type of activity that's really blossoming in popularity as students get more independent and want to see the world in a different way: work exchange. So that you might have heard of woofing or workaway. These are opportunities where you are going and using a platform. Usually these are external platforms that you sign up for as a member, and then you can actually search for individual hosts that will take you in, allow you to share your labor on their property, and in exchange for your labor, you get free room and board. Now, this probably is making the parents on the call be like, what? I'm going to let my kid go and live on a chestnut farm in Italy. But trust me, there are some amazing experiences out there. It's very low cost because it's usually a straight exchange of labor to room and board. So it's a great way to travel in more expensive regions. And a lot of these platforms offer reviews. So you can find a lot of hosts that have good reviews that are reliable. There's different checks and balances. So it does require a lot more research and flexibility and adaptability on the part of the family if you're going to do this type of thing. But I have woofed and done workaways all over the world, and I've had some amazing experiences and made some really good friends on those experiences. So thank you for bearing with me on my very wordy slide, but now you all know what is out there. And this is really where people can start getting inspired. But I also wanted to show you a little bit how this looks in practice. So I want to give you just a couple, student examples of how these itineraries tend to come together. So Elsa and I worked together last year, and she was initially really hesitant about taking a gap year. Actually, it was her dad who connected us, and we had a conversation, because I do free introductory calls with any student who's interested in taking a gap year. And when we connected, I knew that she would be a great gap year student because she was so curious. She really was burnt out at the end of high school, which I think is pretty common amongst students who are really highly academic achieving. But towards the end of high school, you're tired. You've done all the APs, you worked really hard, and she was ready for college. She could have started and succeeded on day one of college, but she just knew she wanted some extra time, and so she deferred her admission from her school, and she decided to do a program in Nepal to start off her year. So she spent 3 months in Nepal. This is her doing a stone carving apprenticeship with a master stone carver. So she spent 3 months there doing all sorts of cultural activities. She trekked in the Himalaya. She was with gap year students her own age the whole time, came home for the holidays, and then decided to spend the second half of her year kind of cultivating some more outdoor skills and doing independent travel. So she started with a month and a half in Costa Rica. She was rappelling off waterfalls. She was getting her wilderness first aid certification. She was trekking in the jungle, all sorts of really cool things. And then for the last portion of her year, she went to Australia and New Zealand. And she was kind of mix and matching. She was doing some low-cost grassroots conservation work, and then she was also doing some hop-on, hop-off bus touring. So we were working together on that itinerary to make sure that it kind of that her parents knew where she was at all times, and kind of knew where she was staying. And I was helping teach her how to find hostels and things like that. So we collaborated on that kind of independent travel piece. But at the end of it, she said this quote, which I love, which is that, people who don't take a gap year are the ones missing out. Because she was really speaking to that mythology that, if you take a gap year, you're going to feel left behind, or you're going to feel older than your peers once you start college. And what we find time and time again is that students are so grateful for having given themselves this set of experiences that they can't imagine not having done it. So if you are one of those people that's a little gap year hesitant because you're a little bit worried about being, off the track, there is no track. Life is a journey, and this is going to help you feel like you're actually leaping forward rather than just doing what everyone else is doing. Next, we have Andre. And so Andre, was from New Orleans and decided to spend his gap year in New Orleans serving his own community, but he actually was working out not where he grew up. He was working in a different area of the city. And he had such a good experience with City Year in New Orleans, which is an AmeriCorps program where you're embedded into an under-resourced school, that he actually signed up for a second year, and then he went into teaching after that. So Andre is a great example of somebody who, when you are really passionate about serving your own community, there are so many cool opportunities that you can seek out that will help you give back to that community, as well as build your own skill set and launch you into, what ended up being his career. And then last we have Michelle, and Michelle is my poster child for someone who self-funded a very adventurous gap year. So Michelle had decided very early on in high school that she was going to take a gap year, and started saving early for it. Ended up saving a good little nest egg of funds, and then her parents were fully supportive, but said, we want you to kind of execute on this. And so with her own budget that she had fundraised herself, and then she'd also gotten a couple scholarships and travel grants, she spent 3 months at language school in Guatemala, and she was doing a small local run language school. So it was not expensive, but she was able to be there for 3 months, had an amazing time with her homestay family, beefed up her Spanish skills. Then she came home for the holidays. And then when she went back after the holidays, she went to Oaxaca, Mexico for 5 months and did an amazing internship with a women's microfinance organization. So she was basically monitoring and evaluating how people were spending their money and helping the organization tabulate that and understand impact. And that was one of her main goals for her gap year, was understanding international development and getting some real world experience in that field. And then she ended her gap year with 2 months of solo travel in Peru and Colombia. So she's forever my hero. And but I just want everybody here to also understand what's possible. So Michelle did this on her own dime, and she also was able to make it work because she was doing some of these more local opportunities that we were collaborating on finding together that fit her goals and her budget. So let's talk a little bit about how this all syncs up with college. So many people who attend these webinars, are bound for some sort of higher education. So I don't want to make assumptions on the call, but for any of you who are, anticipating applying to a four-year school as part of your higher education pathway, there's a couple ways you can do this. So typically what will happen is you'll start creating your college list senior year, or junior year rather, and you really want to, at that point, add a tab that says gap year deferral policies. And every school that you think you're going to apply to, figure out what their gap year deferral policy is, because everybody's a little bit different. Most schools do allow deferrals for a meaningful gap year, but there are exceptions. Like the University of California school system doesn't. There's a couple like Rensselaer and some other kind of engineering heavy or tech heavy schools sometimes don't. Or if you're a performer and you have to do auditions, sometimes you can't defer. So there are special cases, but by and large, if you are a gen ed student going to most private schools and public universities in the country, they will allow deferrals if you can make an argument as to why your gap year is going to be meaningful to you. So if you get your acceptance letters back senior year, spring of senior year, that's when you're actually going to put down a deposit for your school of choice, and then write a letter to that college saying, I would like to take a gap year. Please hold my spot for the following year. I'm going to do this, this, and this. And that's why it's going to make me a better student. Please hold my spot. Sincerely yours. And the college, if they're deferral friendly, will read that. Oh my gosh, you are so impressive. Rubber stamp, hold your spot, and you are good to go. You can have your gap year, and then you know where you're going, and it's part of a 5-year plan. A lot of students these days, I would say it went from, most of my students deferring from school to being about half and half now. Half of my students now apply to school on their gap year. So if that's you, if you're wanting to use your gap year to offer more time to figure out where you want to go to school, that's totally possible too. You just have to add in a couple extra steps to make sure that you get those applications out the door while you're on your gap year. And usually what I'll advise people to do is actually to do your most interesting thing that you're going to do on your gap year in the summer or fall of your gap year. So you have some kind of color to add to some of those college applications. And I want to be careful because college admissions advisors have been specific to say that like a gap year will not override deficiencies in an application. So if you flunked all of senior year, it's not like if you go and work with sea turtles in Costa Rica, it's going to get you into Harvard. However, it does give you an edge. So if you are already qualified for a school and you're kind of one of many in a sea of applicants, sometimes doing something meaningful with your gap year will either at least be a neutral, but if not, a positive. And that is what has been said to me time and time again by college advisors and college admissions folks. So lastly, you do want to pay attention to scholarships because some scholarships and merit aid will defer along with your admission and some you will have to reapply for. And with FAFSA, obviously you will reapply on your gap year to get a package for the following year. So you just have to pay attention to those things. The other thing I would mention is that if you are doing a gap year program that offers college credit, you do want to work with your future college to make sure that you don't get too much credit so that it changes your student status from an incoming freshman to a transfer student. And that's getting a little bit in the weeds, so I don't want to go too far into it, but just it's something to note. This is a beautiful chart that you will see when you get your digital gap year fair guide of all the different things that you could do that are, USA Gap Year Fair program providers and all the different things that they offer, which I think this is a very handy thing. Obviously, you need to spend a little bit more time with it, just glancing at it for a moment, but it'll show you the program types. It'll show you if they do offer college credit. It'll show you where in the world they travel. And it'll also show you what types of financial support they offer because many, many programs have in-house scholarships. They have travel grants. They have social media ambassador grants. They have all sorts of creative ways to help you get on a program and make it affordable. So there are many ways to make a gap year work. Lastly, before we go into Q&A, so start thinking of your questions now. I want to share some resources. Margot already talked at length about Go Overseas, and they are an amazing resource, especially if you're wanting to look at a certain region and wanting to see what programs run in that region or want to just brainstorm and look at some of their articles. It's a great landing spot. Another location that I would highly advise is the Gap Year Association. So the Gap Year Association is a nonprofit that accredits programs for quality, safety, and best practice. So if you see a gap year program that has the seal of accreditation, they have gone through a very vigorous vetting process, and it's kind of a seal of approval. And they do the same thing with consultants, and I'm very honored to be a Gap Year Association accredited consultant. And they also have all sorts of guides and downloadables and information on the GYA website as well. The Gap Year Radio podcast is my podcast, and actually, funny story, your co-host tonight, Margot, and I have been co-hosting this podcast for 6 years, and we're about to start our next season in January. So it is wherever you find your favorite podcast, and you can look for new episodes starting in January. Margot is going to be stepping off of the podcast actually because she has to travel to all these gap year fairs, and she's going to be very busy. So I'm going to hold the torch for us, but it's a great opportunity to hear from alums. That's really what we started the podcast to do, to elevate the voices of different gap year stories. And you can check out the archives of all the different episodes we have up there right now if you want some inspiration and hear from some gap year students themselves. Speaking of resources, I am a resource. You've probably gathered from all these little anecdotes that I've shared that I work with students and I love it. And I would love to talk to you if you're thinking about taking a gap year and you need a little bit of guidance and support. Any senior in high school who's thinking about taking a gap year is cordially invited to set up a brainstorming call with me, which you can do through my website. You can email me. You can also join my newsletter if you use that QR code on your screen. I'm physically in Stowe, Vermont, but I work with students all over the world. And I'm also very active on social media. So you can find me on any of the platforms at EnRoute Gap Year.
Thank you so much for that great overview, Julia. Before we hop into Q&A, we're going to show you a few providers that are examples of programs that you might participate in during a gap year experience.
Hi there, my name is Alex and I work on the outreach team at Where There Be Dragons. At Dragons, we offer the most immersive travel programs for students. So we offer summer programs that are anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks long, and we have gap semesters that range from 5 weeks up to 12 weeks. The majority of them are 12 weeks. We have optional college credit on both summer programs and the semester programs. So you can get a full semester worth of college while doing a semester program with us. And if you're 17 or older, you can get college credit on summer programs as well. So we travel throughout Asia, Latin America, and Africa. Our programs are limited to 12 students and 3 expert instructors, and we only run a limited number of programs each year. Our programs are custom crafted by our incredible instructors, and they really infuse their experiences, their knowledge and expertise, and learn more about what the students are really curious about and interested in to create dynamic, flexible itineraries for every group. So they're catered to you and what you really want to get out of this experience. Throughout the program, students do a variety of activities from homestays, language learning, apprenticeships, trekking, learning more about spiritual and religious traditions, to really learning about what's going on the ground, learning about environmental and social of like different issues that are happening, to learn more about that area. We also do service on our programs. Some of them are a little more service focused than others. And we have everything from learning more of like entrepreneurship focused to more language focused programs, but they all infuse a little bit of every program component on them. And our team is here to help you decide which program is the best for you. We're here to help you decide if you want to do spearfishing in Indonesia, or if you want to go trekking in Bolivia, or really dive into Spanish language learning in Guatemala. There really is something for everyone, and our team is here to help you with that. We visit the programs ourselves. We're instructors on the programs. We do site visits every year, and we really want to get to know you and help you find the best program for you. So feel free to reach out. Thanks so much for your time.
Hi, I'm Derek Tano, the Managing Director for World Class Programs. We are a high school study abroad and gap year association that specializes in one thing: amazing summer experiences for students just like you. What we do each summer, led by our amazing team of super dedicated international educators, is beyond belief. And it's one of the greatest experiences you can have before you head off to college or whatever else life has in store for you. Our programs all operate during the summer and are open to anybody, anywhere in the world currently enrolled in high school or between the ages of 13 and 18. So if that's you, pay attention and you might be able to come with us on one of our summer programs. All of our trips, like I said, operate in the summer so they don't get in the way of whatever other plans you might have. Do you want to spend your last summer as a senior hanging out with your friends, but still take 3 weeks to come with us? You can. Are you planning on going on a full gap year after you graduate? Well, our program could be the great first step out the door. Or are you just a sophomore who wants to have an international experience before you even think about applying to college? Great, come with us. All of our programs operate independently, so you can even take 2 or 3 each summer. Now, what do our programs look like? Well, you will live in the heart of your host city in upscale apartments or hotels shared by world-class program students, never in a homestay, for safety reasons. All of the apartments are controlled by world-class programs, and our world-class programs educators will be staying in the same building as you and are on call 24/7. Speaking of our fantastic educators, you'll take 2 classes while you're abroad with us, 1 major and 1 minor course. Major classes meet every morning, Monday through Friday for 3 hours, and minor courses meet Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in the evenings for 3 hours. Now you can choose from a huge list of these classes so you can tailor them to be exactly what you want to get out of your summer abroad. I, for example, teach our art history courses. In my classes, we are always out in the city, never in a classroom. We're in different museums and temples and churches and everything every day. It's fantastic. I love it, and I think you will too. All of our classes are taught the same way using the same experiential learning method. But now, Derek, what are the programs? Well, we have 5 awesome destinations for you. Florence, Italy, which operates 3 weeks in July. We have Osaka, Japan, 3 weeks in August. Rouen, France, 2 weeks at the end of May and early June. Seville, Spain, 2 weeks at the end of June. And brand new this year, our Western Civilization program that goes through Athens, the Greek Isles, and then southern Italy. If any of this sounds interesting to you, I'd love to chat with you, and so would the rest of our staff. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime at 651-454-5110, and I'd be happy to talk with you. Or if email is more your thing, again, my name is Derek Tano, and you can reach me at derek.tano@learnworldclass.com, as you see on the screen here. You're also encouraged to check out our website, learnworldclass.com. Thanks, everybody. Have an awesome school year, and I hope to see you guys this summer.
Hey you, it's Dad. How are you doing? Thanks for the message last night. I'm glad you managed to find your way. I know what you mean. It's a bit hard at first when you can't understand everything, but it gets easier. I promise. Did you have a chance to explore the city yet? Mom's a little worried that you don't know anyone over there. Have you made any friends in class? What about your neighbors? Anyways, are you doing anything fun this weekend? You know, you just have to keep trying new things and you'll be all right. And remember, you never know who you'll meet. Even if you don't always know what to say. I'm just so happy that you're doing this. All right, we're so proud of you. And we know that you're going to have the time of your life. love you. Speak soon.
Hello, I'm Erin. I will be attending the Gap Year Fairs representing Pacific Discovery this year. I'm an instructor for Pacific Discovery. I've done a couple programs in Australia, and I just finished a program called the Polynesian Journey, where we went from Hawaii, then Fiji, and finished up in New Zealand. And it was the best program. I'm still feeling a bit of a high from it all. So I'm so excited to talk to you all more about these programs and give you all the information that you need to make the decision to join a gap year program with Pacific Discovery. I love these programs because they're more than just being a tourist. And yes, we do those things and we have once in a lifetime experiences, but we also get to give back to the communities that we visit and learn a lot about the culture and environment and everything along the way, as well as learn about ourselves. A lot of focus on personal development as well, which is quite cool. You gain a lot of important life skills just in a matter of weeks. It's pretty awesome seeing like the progression in students from when they first come to the end. I love these programs. I'm stoked to be an instructor with Pacific Discovery, and I love meeting all the students with each program, and can't wait to talk more about it. And I'll see you at a fair near you.
Hello, I'm Ryan Allen, Director at Irish Gap Year. We offer structured group programs in Ireland and Europe. We have a creative track where students work with professional Irish artists. We have an outdoor adventure and leadership school where we're out in nature exploring, surfing, hiking. And we also have a program that explores Europe by train and builds students' travel IQs. Ultimately, all of our programs are about getting out into the world, growing as a person, having fun, and de-stressing, connecting with ourselves, connecting with others. 3 months is the typical length of our program. Our group size ranges from 12 to 16 students, and we run in the autumn and the spring. We are a Gap Year Association accredited program as well, which means that you can pay for any of our programs with your 529 fund and earn college credits while gapping with us.
So if anybody else does have some questions, now's the time. We have a couple more minutes. I know we're kind of coming up on the end of time here, but I think we can certainly stay on for a couple more minutes if anything would be helpful. I know I said earlier to pop those into the chat. I do apologize. It turns out that the chat is not enabled for all attendees. So it's the Q&A box that you should be able to access on the dashboard for Zoom. So if you want to pop anything into the Q&A box, we can go there.
But I'll stop the share too, just so that everybody can see us a little bit more clearly while we spend these last couple minutes together. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, we do have a question, Julia. What would you say are the best next steps in terms of choosing the type of program, and where should someone go from here?
Great. Such a good question. I would say that it kind of depends whether you're a junior or a senior. So if you're a junior in high school or a family of a junior, I would say that this is the time to dream big. So this was a great first step, attending a webinar. If you are close to a fair, attending a fair and talking to these different gap year programs and figuring out kind of which ones are really resonating with you, but you don't need to make decisions during your junior year. It's more about information gathering. If you're a senior and you're on this call or listening in, or you're a parent of a senior, that's when that brainstorming exercise I mentioned would be a really good thing to do around this time of year. So get out a piece of paper, get out a whiteboard or a notes app and start jotting down the personal, practical, and professional anchors that you could envision using your gap year for. And also that geography piece of like, where in the world might I want to go? Another thing you can brainstorm is who you know. So there might be family and friends in different areas of the country or the world who might be able to kind of unlock different pieces of a gap year experience. So I had a student who was from California but had an uncle who was in Boston, and so they spent a month in Boston just to like explore the city and check it out. And I think that that's a good example of how you might be able to leverage your network a little bit too. So doing that kind of brainstorming right now is a great way to, when you then start looking at programs, you can be like, oh, marine conservation is one of my gap year goals. So I'm going to make sure that the programs I look at are connected with that there's a marine conservation element. So you're not just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Awesome. Thanks,
Yeah.
Julia.
What do you think, Margot? You have been doing this just as long as me, just not in a consultant capacity. So what do you think is a great way to start?
I think that everything that you've mentioned has been super helpful. Yeah, I mean, I have all similar thoughts to that, but we actually did have a few more questions come in. So happy to move through
Perfect.
some of these so we can make sure these get answered in case folks
Yeah,
need
I'm here for it.
evening. I know someone asked for the link for the Gap Matcher quiz again, so trying to locate that. I'm happy to send that in the chat in just a moment here. We have a couple of questions about just like a little bit more information about 529 funds, and I've also dealt with 529 funds a lot over the years, and it can be a really complicated process. So I know you touched on it, Julia, but do you mind just maybe digging in a little bit more about the basics of those?
Sure, yes. And I would love for you to compliment me on this since you've done it on the program side. But basically, so not all programs offer 529. So the first kind of point is you need to know who is eligible for 529 funds. And so it's basically any program that can offer college credit is kind of pre-qualified to use your 529s for. One thing that is also important is that whoever runs your 529 account, which is different organizations and companies all over the country, are going to be the ultimate decision makers as to whether or not your gap year experience is worthy of unlocking those funds in a tax advantaged way. I have talked to many different gap year programs, and it seems like if you do offer college credit as a gap year program, it is a supported post-secondary experience. But you still kind of need to work with them and make sure that they agree. But assuming that's the case, and if you want to know what programs offer college credit, one of the easy button solutions is to know that all the Gap Year Association accredited programs offer credit through University of Montana. So that's one place. And then other Gap Year programs have their own accreditors. So you kind of have to look around the Go Overseas and USA Gap Year Fairs pages to kind of see if they do offer that credit, or you can look in that handy dandy chart as well. But if you do find a program that offers credit, the next step is to typically that you apply to their school of record and become kind of a registered student at that school of record. And then you do your gap year program. Typically, you are not doing coursework on program. You're usually keeping a journal, doing lectures, taking workshops, and all the stuff is experiential. And then you typically will write a paper at the end. And that's what kind of unlocks the different levels of credit. Or sometimes there might be a proficiency test if part of that credit is linked to a language learning component as well. What would you add to that, Margot, from the program side?
Yeah, so it is really interesting. I mean, all of that is super valid. And I think in terms of, yes, the tax purposes of it, you do need to be able to there's like a very specific tax form that you would need to be able to get from that accrediting organization or that college or university in order for that to like really work with the 529 fund. That being said, and I think Julia kind of mentioned this, but like there are some people who are in charge of 529 funds who like your accountant, the person who's managing that fund for you, who sometimes know a workaround or are able to kind of like still, even if it's for educational purposes, but not an accredited body, like they're able to work around that. So I have had some families who like at my previous organization before we had college credit or in between, they were like, oh, it's fine. We can, we're working it out anyway. So, but there is just like more of a tax hit if for some reason that doesn't work out. So that's the real big thing to think about there. And we also did have a question of what is a 529 fund, which is a really great, I think Julia, you did kind of cover this, but just to clarify, that is the like a fund that is specifically for educational purposes, and it does have a tax advantage associated with it. So you might have funds like an education fund that's that's not a 529 account, and it won't have those same stipulations on it that an actual 529 has. So just to clarify that as well.
Yeah, and you may have college fund that is a 529 account and not even realize it. So that, I don't know, you might need to take a look at it. But basically, a lot of times when families open up a college savings fund when the kid is younger and people contribute to it, then you might be in this situation right now of a gap year is actually going to be the best investment we can make in this young adult, and how can we leverage that college fund at this moment so that whatever comes next is going to be that much more impactful.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah. Okay, we have a few in here, Julia. So again, I know we're a little past time, so if anyone needs to leave, no worries. This is a great one for you, Julia. Just what sort of services are typically provided by a consultant, and what is the sort of cost range that might be associated?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I try not to get too much into that on these info calls because I want to make sure I'm maximizing kind of the nuts and bolts of gap years. But, when I do, every gap year consultant works a little bit differently. For me, I work with my students end to end. So typically students will come to me senior year, and they may come to me with some gap year ideas of how they want to spend their time, or they might just be a complete blank slate. And either way, the only ingredient I need is a student who wants to take a gap year and wants to work with me. And I get in there and we create those goals. We create a framework of the budget and the parent hopes and dreams. And then I start producing menus of recommended programs. And I would say that one of the main advantages, if you don't find a gap year program that works for you and can fill out your whole year during the fairs, my vetted program database is a listing of thousands of programs at this point that I have vetted myself. So I have a database that I pull from. And so I might say, oh, I have a partner who's this, small school in Guatemala that you can go and work at or volunteer at or something like that. And I also work with students to create independent pieces of their year. So if they want to go backpacking or they want to do a work exchange, it's a lot about coaching a student through how to do that and help parents feel supported throughout that experience as well. And so it's the planning and itinerary design, and then I support the students in the pre-departure preparation during their year, and then debriefing and kind of offboarding them at the end of their gap time too. And that service is $2,700, and it's kind of just a package fee. And I also do half year packages for students who are taking a half gap year, if they're a Jan or Feb admit, or if they're working at home and then want to travel for half the year, for some reason just need a half year service. So, yeah.
Thank you, Julia. Let's see. We had another question just about how pressed for time are we? If you're a senior, it's coming up quickly. What's the difficult planning and enrollment deadline for a lot of these organizations?
Yeah. Well, I want every senior family to take a deep breath and let your shoulders fall, because you are ahead of the game. If you're on this phone call and learning about gap years right now, you're actually ahead of the curve of what we see when we mostly see students senior year deciding to take a gap year and starting the planning process. So the time is now. So the time. It's you're not behind schedule. You're right on time if you're watching this right now. So this is the time to kind of engage with a gap year counselor, or to start that goal setting process, or to start doing informational calls with gap year programs that sound cool to you. And then you'll naturally kind of start sorting out your itinerary over the next few months. But basically the time frame that I suggest is to work towards having a plan for your gap year by graduation. And that might seem like a long way away, but we all know how fast time rolls on. So it's a good time now to start researching programs and start blocking out your itinerary. And you don't need to have everything figured out by the time you graduate, but you should have it all penciled in, if that makes sense, with some room for serendipity and some change if that's needed.
Awesome. Thanks, Julia.
Yeah.
And we also had a question just about, does a gap year need to be a full year? I know we talked about some programs and splitting up the year, but yeah, just a question about does it have to be a full year? Can it just be partial year? And, I know we also have some colleges that do spring admissions and such. So I thought that might be good to touch on as well.
Yeah, definitely. So it really, that question is kind of a twofold, because I think that if you're talking about requesting from the college, it typically is a full year. So if you go to your future college and you say, I'd like to take a gap year, they don't usually allow you to just take a gap semester and start in the spring. But they will tell you that you're allowed to do that. So that's what might happen to some people on this call. In spring, you might get a January or February admission from a college, in which case you have a half gap. So in short, your gap year can really be any length of time. The most important thing is that you have a plan for after your gap year, that a gap year is a bridge to the next thing. So whether it's a 3-month, 6-month, year-long, 18-month-long period of time, there should be an idea of what you're building towards, and whether that's a college certification program, vocational school, military, career, whatever it is, you want to build towards that.
Awesome. Thanks, Julia. I know we're coming up on 5 o'clock Pacific time, 8 o'clock Eastern time. I know it's getting late, so I think we should do one more and then I'll try to type questions and answer a couple others in the chat. But can you provide a general cost range that someone might experience if they're looking at either, whether it is a short-term program that's, like you said, more cost neutral up to like the higher end and kind of what that range might be specifically? They were asking about like teaching English abroad, how much might that cost? But yeah, a range might be nice.
Yeah, definitely. And so this is where, where I know that I gave a very wiggly response before when I said a gap year can be taken at any amount. And that is true, but it is, there obviously are different costs attached to different programs. So if we're talking about like a volunteer program where you're teaching English and you're working with a nonprofit or an organization that's supporting you through that experience, that does mean you're typically paying to volunteer, which is not considered unethical or bad practice. That is just, you're basically offsetting the cost that it costs to have you as a volunteer and treat you well. So that could be anywhere from, if it's a grassroots, meaning like a local opportunity that's run through a school doesn't have international representation, that could be as little as a few $100s a month up to $1,000 a month. If it's a, well-supported program that has weekend excursions and has a dedicated, volunteer manager or something along those lines, you might be looking at $2,000 to $3,000 a month, depending on where in the world you're going. Now, for some of these more facilitated, programs that offer college credit, the reason that they are more expensive, which is by that I mean, to the tune of $15,000 to $20,000 for a semester. What you're getting from that is a highly skilled facilitator and leader duo, usually, that is managing logistics, helping with all the activities, and you're also moving around, or you're doing things that are going to be have a lot more risk management attached to them. So if you're doing things like whitewater rafting or hiking in the Himalayas and things like that, you want to know that your leaders are really well trained for those kinds of things. So experiential programs tend to be more expensive because of those factors. So anywhere from international volunteering or interning, which typically is, let's say, $3,000 to $5,000 a month, and then the experiential programs you're looking at more like $5,000 to $10,000 a month, depending on where in the world and what it offers.
Awesome. I think we got all the questions answered, Julia. I'm not seeing any more come through right now, but I know that Julia popped her contact information into the chat. So if anybody
I think that actually, Margot, you might need to reshare that because I don't think I can share that to the group. So
to everyone.
I just said I was sending it to you so you could distribute it to everybody else. But that's me. If you want to reach out, I'd love to hear from you.
There we go. I just shared her contact information.
I'd love to hear from you too, Margot, of course.
Always. But if anybody else has follow-up questions, Julia is a great resource. I just saw one more question come in about the recording. We will be sharing this recording out with you all after this, and it will be live on the Go Overseas YouTube page. So we'll make sure that you all have access to this, and I'll send a couple follow-up emails in the coming days. But feel free to reach out to either of us if you have any other questions. Julia is a fantastic resource. And otherwise, just really appreciate you all spending your evening with us to learn a bit more about gap years tonight.
Thanks, Margot, and thanks for everybody who came tonight.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.